Graham Cowgill. I'm one of the pastors here, and man, one more time, how great was that, huh? Good night. Both times, just hearing like a few stories from the people getting baptized and knowing what a step of courage it is, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this deserves to be celebrated. And I'm going to tell you, being a pastor is like one of the most interesting jobs there is. It is the weird mixture, tension of, there's like a responsibility component. Sometimes it feels like burdensome a little bit, if I'm going to be honest. The majority of times it just feels like a big honor. But I realize I get to be with people in their best and in their worst, you know? That's like what comes with the territory. Thinking of the best, like I get to do premarital counseling. I get to officiate weddings. I get to share with you guys those moments of child dedication, baptisms, and just the celebration. And also, I get to do grief counseling, right? I get to sit with people bedside in their last days. I get to connect with and pray with and support people who are in the middle of tragedy and hurt and heartbreak and chaos and transition, all of that. And in my experience, in those kind of defining, even polarizing events in life, when I watch people, observe people in those situations, there seems to be kind of two camps of people separated by a mindset differential. And the mindset, the two different mindsets that people have, it's not that determines how you're going to act in those situations, because nobody knows how they're going to react until you're in one of the situations, right? One of the famous philosophers, Mike Tyson, said everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? You never know how you're going to react. But what I have seen is the difference in this mindset determines when something like that happens, a defining moment, be it tragedy or celebration. The different two mindsets, one camp will look back on their lives with regret, and the other camp looks back on their life with satisfaction and gratitude and fulfillment. And the two different mindsets are this. One camp has a destination mindset, and the other has a journey mindset. The destination mindset is this mindset of arriving somewhere, right? That happiness and joy is there, and it becomes elusive because we have this assumption that, once I achieve our special lock next level, that's where happiness lies. And I know where it is. I just have to get there. It's in the next benchmark. It's in the next job. It's in the next marriage. It's in the next goal. And we just find ourselves going for that. Where's that place? But I think you would agree with me that there's no quicker pathway to discontentment than the expectation of arrival. We'll never arrive. We'll never arrive, but we try. In fact, we find ourselves with all of our efforts, even with our finances and our time and our priorities, like building up to, leading towards, yearning for this concept of someday. And we say, man, someday I will do that. Someday it will be better. Someday I'm going to play catch with my kid, right? Someday I'm going to go camping with my kids. Can't do it right now. You guys understand it's a really busy work time, and if I'm going to get that promotion, I got to put in overtime right now. And listen, I'm doing this for the family. I'm doing this because I need money for someday. Someday I'm going to work on myself. Yes, we can both agree that I've got some issues. I get it, and I know they surface every once in a while. I don't have time right now. It's kind of a busy time in my life, right? But I'll wait till things slow down. And to be totally honest, it's not really hurting anybody, Like I figured out how to manage it. I haven't really got caught yet. I'm still functional. But yes, I agree with you. It needs to be handled, so I will deal with that someday. And the elusive someday where happiness exists, where it lives, we find all of our attention going towards it, prioritizing something for the hypothetical. Man, This past month has been really heavy for Shoreline Church. We have had some tough situations, and I've realized two things. One is I've realized that tomorrow is not promised to anybody. Nobody is promised tomorrow. None of us are. And two is I've realized this, that when it comes to the end of our lives, when it comes to us being in the middle of tragedy, in that moment when we have clarity and perspective, we find that the most important things in our life do not exist in the hypothetical of someday. The most important things in our life are actually the relationships that we are in every day. Oh, are you kidding me? That girl knows truth now. We see this, not to belabor the point, but we've seen this in 9/11. There was calls that went out from this plane where people knew that my life has an expiration date, be it minutes or hours. And in that moment, I believe those people in the plane probably had the most beautiful perspective and clarity of anybody ever. You realize in that moment what truly is important. Maybe not able to do anything of it. And actually, they would pass around phones, if you've heard the recordings, and each one would take this phone and they would reach out to people in their lives. And as far as I've heard, none of the calls were to stockbrokers, right? Unless they were your friends, none of the calls were to, the pool guy to make sure they come by or like ordering something off Amazon. Every call was to a relationship, was to somebody in their life to say, just tell so-and-so I love them. Just tell so-and-so that I'm sorry. Just tell so-and-so that I forgive them. With the perspective of tragedy, with maybe the closest to eternal perspective that anybody ever has, instantly people realize innately what is truly important to them. And it's not the hypothetical of someday. It's the things that we've surrounded and need to invest in now. We talked about this a few weeks ago, but we know, I think, especially when something terrible happens, our need for relationships. I think that we understand it. And it goes beyond just, hey, relationships are cool. I think that I need those. We had talked about the idea that God exists. This is mysterious, and we'll only really understand this when we get to heaven. But he exists in three distinct persons. Okay, so there's like this Godhead, the three persons of God. God the Father, God the Son, who is Jesus, and then the Holy Spirit is who makes up God. And in Genesis 1, there's this verse of when man was created, and there's a conversation happening inside of God, a conversation with himself, where he says, let us create man in our image, signifying a few things. One is that God, his core being is relational. God actually exists in perfect relationship. At the core of who he is designed, he exists in relationship. And if we are created in God's image, if we bear his image, then it is designed in us the need for relationship. It's not a cool thing. It's not the icing on the cake. It is necessary for our growth. It is necessary for our existence. We bear the image of a God who exists in relationship. And so a lot of us think, yeah, that's a cool thing. And God is saying, I've actually designed you to do this. And we read this throughout scriptures. Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. Hebrews 10:24, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And all of us, in our peaks and valleys, we understand the need for relationships. When you have something to celebrate and you go to high five somebody and nobody's there, that's a huge bummer. When you're in the valley and like you need somebody beside you to, lean your head on their shoulder and cry and nobody's there, that's a huge bummer. We recognize our need for relationships in the peaks and in the valleys. However, in just the everyday life, in the commonplace, I think that it's difficult to convince ourselves that relationships are worth the effort, right? It's difficult. Why? Because relationships are inherently, they just don't make sense, actually. They don't make sense. They're too difficult. It's hard. Like, if I've got my goals, I'm not going for it. In fact, relationships are getting in the way, man. They're messy. And they're difficult, and we think, is this worth the effort? Is this something to put our time in? And two things. One is, I believe, is our fault, and the second, I believe, is maybe how we've been misguided a little bit. The first one, that is our fault, is the reason that we don't go for relationships, the reason we've convinced ourselves we don't need it, is because we as humans are lazy. We're lazy. Let's just call it what it is. Call a spade, we're lazy, right? I'm not going to project it. I'm lazy. And I know that relationships take a lot of work. Last night, I was talking to my wife, Kristen, and I told her, I think I'm a really good, grandparent relationship guy. Grandparent shows up an hour a day, gives a kid a Red Bull and says, good luck with your parents, right? I'm good at those. If I got an hour-long meeting and I know that it's over at 1:30, I can be so invested. I mean, I am just, all of my attention is and you're like, oh, this guy is really connecting with me. But I realize that, man, the relationships in my life that I care the most about, that take the most work, I think that I get lazy. I think that I care more about myself. I'm self-protective inside of those. The relationship of my wife, sometimes of my kids. I think in my mind, oh, this is going to take prolonged investment, and that's really, really difficult, and I'm lazy. So I'm not going to discount that. I recognize that is there for all of us, and for all of us, we need maybe an awakening in that and saying it is worth it. But the second thing, what we're going to talk about today, and look, we're not going to talk too terribly long today, but I do think that it's necessary sometimes to have a strategy for what God says is important. What's our role here on Sunday morning? Our role here, we say that rows are for inspiration, circles are for transformation. All we're doing inside of this time is finding some things that God says is important, encouraging each other towards that. How do we take the next step towards that? That's all we're doing. I want to give you guys some talking points between yourselves and things for you to talk to God about this week. And since he says it's important, I was like, let's look at this strategically. And so we are actually going to lay out 4 levels of relationship, 4 levels of friendship that I think every single person should have. Not one is more important than the other, not one is less important. Everyone has its role. But let's dissect. What does this look like in our lives? The first one, first level, is acquaintances. Acquaintances. And the word that I'm associating with that is learn. It's learn. If you're anything like me, sometimes I feel bad for having acquaintances. I'm like, am I allowed to have acquaintances as a pastor? I meet somebody for the first time and I'm like, I got to get a second meeting. And then second meeting, I'm like, got to get a double date, right? Got to invite them to my house for Thanksgiving. And I don't know if you resonate with that, but you're like, man, am I allowed to just say hi and not see them again? Or do I need to invest in them and make sure that I, rotate and balance their tires every week? And I think that it is okay to have acquaintances. Because for me personally, maybe your schedule is different than mine, but I don't have time to invest in deep relationships with everybody. And I don't want to. There's some people I just don't get along with. That's okay. Am I allowed to say that? But it's a role. I understand that they're acquaintances. Now, the word that I put with it was learn. And the reason is because this is something that I think is a great habit to build into ourselves. The people that you just see from time to time, your one-time meeting, this word can transcend all those relationships. And the word learn means ask questions about. Learn about them. Every person that I meet, I say to myself, I want to be able to write a biography on this person by the end of our conversation. I ask them about their family history. I ask them about their political views. I ask them about their church history. I want to learn, one, because it allows me to speak a word of encouragement to them. You don't have to know somebody to encourage them. You don't have to know somebody to support them. You don't have to know somebody to enter their story and speak a word of value. And two, when I learn about people, even if it's just commonplace, Starbucks conversations, I expand my worldview. I learn more about humanity. If we are image bearers of God, every one of us is image bearers of God, I have a better view of who God is the more people I get to know. We each reflect God in our own personal, unique way. So man, I just view that as seeing the face of God when I get to know stories and get to hear about people's lives, learn. But what's happened for a lot of us is with these acquaintances, we put something out there, we go for something, and we are afraid even of acquaintances to get in anymore because we've had a few acquaintance relationships that person showed up on our doorstep the next week. And we're like, oh, never again. I want to tell you, it is okay to have acquaintance relationships. And in fact, I would challenge you to have acquaintance relationships, to enter conversations and to learn the beauty of people. Second level, casual friendships. Casual friendships. So we continue to learn, and now we put in share appropriately. Maybe I should have capitalized that. Share appropriately. When I was in the Air Force, in basic training, each group called a flight goes through this together. It's 8 weeks, and then you graduate together. And my TI at that time was giving me this theory. So there were male flights and female flights, and we had a sister flight. And here's his theory. And he said, here's my theory of female flights. And just so I don't get any hate mail, this is not all females, this is just female flights, okay, ladies? So this isn't speaking to all women necessarily. This is just about female flights. Here's what he said. Because we got in there and the girls would all get together and they would start sharing about their lives. And they would talk about their likes and their dislikes and their passions and their fears and their family history. And man, they would get it all out. And I saw them 2 days later and all the girls are like, I was like, how's it going in your guys' flight? And she's like, you wouldn't believe it. It is beautiful. I think we're all best friends. I have never known anybody the way that I know the girls in my flight. And in my mind, I was like, oh, well done, right? Good job. A week later, everyone knows where it's going. Female flights, not females. There was a fight in the female flight where two of the women had helmets in their hand, like Myles Garrett style, and we're just like yank, like fighting each other. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so the TI goes, well, here's my theory. If you get it all out there, you put all your stuff out there, like it looks great up front, but then a week or two in, you realize that there are some people that you like and some people that you don't like. And the people that you don't like have all this information about you, and now they're using it as ammunition. Anybody ever done that? Anybody ever stepped out vulnerably and then had it like thrown back in your face? A few weeks ago in the 7 p.m. service, we talked about this idea of giving love to people and what that looks like. And I don't have time to go into the illustration, but basically what was communicated is when you really love somebody, you put a piece of yourself out there that hurts when it is trampled on. That's how you really love. Love is not just saying, love you, man, right? Dap it up. Let's hug a tree and wear some hemp, right? Love is actually sacrificing. Love is giving beyond yourself. Love is going to a place that you are hoping this is treated well. And what happened with all of them is they suddenly realized, man, I wish she didn't have that info, or she didn't have that info. And they tried to gather, but it was too late. Guys, we're not excused from the metaphor, because while women flights. Whew. Well, women flights, put it all out there. We seldom offer any of ourselves. And we shoulder that responsibility. We shoulder that burden. And we say, it's not manly to ask for help. It's not manly to have people around us. And so we try to just grit our way through things. And then it comes to medical issues and to mental breakdowns and to midlife crisis because we have tried to get through it ourselves. And what I realized, even inside of this metaphor, is that there is such a thing as strategic vulnerability. Strategic vulnerability. In my casual friendships, see the people that I see routinely, I do share about myself, but when I share, in all honesty, I share with 0% expectation of it being handled well, right? 0. When I share, it's not like, boy, I hope that, I know that somebody is going to give me a meme to look at, right? I know that somebody's going to say the wrong thing, and that's okay. Because what I think a lot of us are misguided in is we are misguided in our expectation of relationship, our expectation of vulnerability. And the different levels, what we have been maybe gotten wrong, at least strategically, is the expectation of reciprocity. What am I expecting back in this relationship? What am I expecting back from vulnerability? When I put this thing out there, what do I need given back? And when I share with casual friendships, honestly, I'm not sharing that for the benefit of me. I'm primarily sharing this for the sake of the atmosphere of vulnerability. I'm desiring to create a culture of vulnerability. And actually, for my own benefit, I want to actively work against pride. Last week in the 7 p.m. service, we said, lead with your wounds, not with your wins. And so I practice that, but when I do it with my casual friendship, it's not because I need you to react this way. It's because I want us to create a safe atmosphere where we're okay being ourselves. Let's keep going. Next level. Close friendships. We continue to learn, we continue to share, but we add something new in this level, and this is challenge. Challenge. So this is the level where we begin to share our convictions. We begin to share our goals. We begin to invite the voice of accountability, that we allow somebody to actually speak in. We say, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but here's what I'm going for in 2020. This is what I believe God is leading me to. This is what I want to see. And if you see something in my life that is misaligned with my desires, I want you to call it out. It's that level. It's the people around you that you invite their challenge. Now, this is also the level of relationship where you begin hurt makes sense because you're opening up that part of you. Because you're being vulnerable now with a little expectation of somebody giving something back, right? But the only way that we are ever going to thrive inside of relationships, the only way that we're going to grow is if we're willing to give the vulnerable piece of ourselves and somebody else can prove to you that they love you. Jesus said when he came here to earth, his first instruction was not believe me. It wasn't believe who I am, it was follow me. Before you believe, I want you to follow. Because if you listen to my words right now, you're going to take them as instructions. You're going to digest them academically. I want to create a context of love. I want you to trust my motive, that I want what's best for you. Follow until you know that I am trustworthy, and then you will begin to believe. You will listen to my instruction in a different way when you know that I want what's best for you. I think relationships are the same way. Relationships are the same way. Is that for me, man, especially close relationships, what I look for beyond anything else is honesty. It's not perfection. It's not perfection. To be close friends with me, it doesn't demand perfection because I know that I'm human. I know that you're human. I'm not thrown off by humanity. I'm not thrown off by screw-ups. I'm not thrown off by outbursts. our relationship would be pretty rocky, baby. Women flights. I'm not thrown off by that stuff because I recognize that humans are imperfect. Humans are not deitized in my mind. Actually, 2 weeks ago, had a call from a friend in California, and she called up and said, I got to ask you a question. I was like, yeah. And essentially she goes, how do people not piss you off? She was just mad in the moment. She's like, how do you not hate people, pretty much? And I gave her a line in the middle of that moment, and I've tried to poke holes in it since, but it's holding some water. And I said, what I try to do at least is see the best in people, but I'm never surprised by the worst in people. I want to see the best in people, but I'm not surprised by the worst in people. I know what I'm capable of. We're humans, and we are imperfect. And my relationships, my deepest friendships don't require perfection. They do require honesty. This is something that my wife is teaching me. She is so beautifully honest inside of our relationship. And it doesn't even get to X before she's honest. She's like, I'm starting to have this mindset that might go there. I'm like, golly, I got to share that too, right? But I've realized that the most important relationships, the ones that actually enable us to grow, are built on trust. They're built on prolonged honesty. The same way Jesus said, follow me until you trust me. Follow me until you know that I love you. You will receive my instruction differently then. Leads us to our last level. Intimate relationships. We continue to learn. We continue to share. We challenge, but we add a component in this one of healing. Remember, I talked about reciprocity and the expectation of that, especially inside of vulnerability. That I don't have expectation inside of acquaintance. I don't have expectation inside of casual relationships. I do here. I have the expectation of self-awareness. I don't have the expectation. I demand challenge. I demand accountability because that is what I want to offer my most intimate relationships. We say here that you have to be known to be grown. You have to be known to be grown. And I know that I'm speaking to a lot of us when I say, you may be in here, in this room, surrounded by people, and nobody knows you. You may go to your family reunions. You may be with your closest friends, and no one really knows you. For somebody to love you, they have to know you. There's a possibility that nobody really loves you because nobody really knows you. True friendship, which is based on an extension of God's relationship to us, is an extension of God's grace and says to people, true friendship says, I will love you past your faults. I will love you past your screw-ups. I expect humanity, and I will be here to extend grace to walk with you, not to excuse you, but to call you up in the middle of that. But so many times we don't give the opportunity to people to show how much they love us because we refuse to disclose our faults. You have to be known to be grown. Otherwise, you're growing this other person who doesn't exist. Forget that noise, man. Life is too short for that, isn't it? Life is too short for facades and putting this on. You have to be known to be grown. So I want you to look at these 4 levels, and I want you to evaluate maybe where you're lacking this morning. Where are you lacking? Because all of these are necessary. They're all necessary. If you're lacking in acquaintances, there's a chance that maybe you aren't having enough conversations to simply learn about people. Maybe you're afraid to step into those conversations because you are scared it's going to take, extended involvement in their life. What would it look like to begin to have those conversations courageously? Not knowing where they lead, not knowing tomorrow, but learning. I'll tell you what, every one of your best friends started as an acquaintance, right? You never know where that's going to go. Lead with learning. Even if it turns into your best friend, you want that relationship started on a foundation of learning and value. Practice hearing story and learning. What about casual friendships? If you don't have casual friendships, I'm just guessing, it's maybe a reflection, practically, of inconsistency of schedule. Usually when we have casual friends, it's because we see a group every week. That is the dap up, how are you doing, quick shoulder rub type of crew, right? That's the people that you see at the gym regularly. And so if we don't have these healthy habits built into our lives, if we don't have these healthy routines, maybe that's where it's lacking. We don't have these casual friends because we're not anywhere often enough to have those. What about close relationships? When was the last time you invited challenge into your relationship? Do you know what your 2020 goals are? Do you know what you're going for? Would you be willing to speak that to the people who are closest to you and say, hey, I want to let you know that your accountability is on the table. I want this to be a relationship where we call each other up. And for some of us, close friends are where it stops. And we've never been willing to go that extra step into intimate relationship. We've never offered the parts of ourselves that are terrifying, knowing that we have to be fully known to be grown. Jesus modeled this for us, even the 4 levels. If you read through the Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' time here on earth, all the conversations that he has, even with people for the first time and then see you, never see you again, those conversations, even if he knows the answer, he asks the person questions because he wants them to feel valued. He wants them to feel loved. Broken people, the sinners, the outcasts of the time love to be around Jesus because nobody else gave him the time of day, and Jesus, who was fully God, fully man, listened to them. Then he had casual friendships. He had these places that he went to temple and to different cities, and where I'm sure he dapped people up and said, how are the kids, right? I'm sure. Close friendships. The 12 disciples that followed Jesus, that Jesus invited to be a part of intimate moments. We read times when Jesus would out loud process miracles with them to teach, to debrief. We see that he invites them to the Last Supper that Jesus knew was going to be one of the last moments of his life. And even deeper, Jesus had intimate friendships. Peter, James, and John were considered his close friends, the people who he was willing to be the most vulnerable with. In his most burdensome, intense moment, he invited the people who were close to him. Look at Matthew 26. And Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, sit here while I go over there to pray. This was the night that he was going to be arrested, and it said that he fell to the ground in this moment, and he was so overcome with burden that his sweat was like drops of blood, right? He took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Anybody here ever been in that moment of anguish, of burden, and needed those people with you? The reason is not because relationships are nice icing on the cake, because you are designed with a need for relationships. I want to show you guys a picture. You probably recognize one guy in this picture. Maybe some of you recognize both. The younger guy, was a while ago, is Tim McGraw, and the older one's his dad, is Tug McGraw, who is a pitcher in the majors. And Tug McGraw, as the story goes, got a tough diagnosis. He had a brain tumor, and he goes under the knife, and when he comes out, it says that he fights for 9 months, and then he passed away, which inspired that same year for Tim to write a song that maybe some of you guys have heard. Hear the lyrics. Live like you were dying. He said, I was in my early 40s with a lot of life before me, and a moment came that stopped me on a dime. I spent most of the next days looking at the x-rays, talking about the options and talking about sweet time. And it switches to the son. I asked him when it sank in that this might really be the real end. How's it hit you when you get that kind of news? Man, what do you do? He said, I was finally the husband that most of the time I wasn't. And I became a friend would like to have. And all of a sudden, going fishing wasn't such an imposition. And I went 3 times that year I lost my dad. I finally read the good book, and I took a good, long, hard look at what I'd do if I could do it all again. And then I went skydiving. I went Rocky Mountain climbing. I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. And I loved deeper. And I spoke sweeter. And I gave forgiveness I'd been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. Man, what father says that to a son, right? I think that I would tell my kids, I hope you live till you're 110. And this father recognizes in this moment, like we talked about, with the utmost clarity and perspective, if I could give you any gift, it would be the gift of perspective, the gift of clarity to know what's important. That you would not put things off till someday, son, but you would realize what is important in your everyday. That you would invest in something that God has said is necessary for your growth, that you would surround yourself with people that want the best for you, that you would realize what is truly important. So what about us? What about us? Let's borrow Tug McGraw's perspective for a second. Man, we don't want to wait, do we? We don't want to wait till a tragedy hits. We don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive in this. And at least in this moment, I think a lot of us have the clarity that this is something that we need to step into. And God is calling us, every one of us differently, in some regard to take that next step. What does that look like for you? I think we have two things. One is I just think that this would be sweet. What if in the next 30 days, every one of us took the time to reach out to our close and intimate friends and just told them how much they mean to us? They need to hear that. We don't do that enough. You don't want to wait on that. And 2, I would encourage you today, every one of us take the next scary, terrifying, vulnerable, courageous step into community like we were designed. How is God calling you to respond today? Don't wait for someday. Let's invest in the relationships that are here every day. Let's pray. Oh, mercy. Father, man, I got to think about specific relationships for me, and gosh, I don't know what's holding me back. I really don't. I don't know. It's tough and it's uncomfortable. But Lord, this is so to me. You are speaking so to me, and I need this. I need this. If I'm going to grow, if I'm going to surround myself with people who echo your thoughts of me, I have to invest in a relationship. And this is scary for me, and I realize how much time it takes, and I realize that it's work. But Father, this is worth it because you have designed us to connect with you inside of this way. Don't let us leave here without responding. Imprint it on our hearts. Give us the courage. We are already in the throes of courage when we see people willing to be baptized, to make this public declaration. Continue that atmosphere here. The atmosphere of vulnerability that we need this, that we concede our need for other people, impress it on our hearts, and let us not walk out of these doors before you give us a tangible next step of how to make this a reality. Not someday, today. Not to put off what's really important. We love you. We are learning to trust you. In your precious name, amen.